Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, Mackenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Sarah Sanford. Sarah was born and raised in the Dallas-Fort Worth area with a blended family of 7. Sarah has been living in her self-converted camper van, Sunny, with her high school sweetheart, or husband now, Cody, since the fall of 2021. For the first year and a half, they worked seasonally in Utah, Oregon, and Colorado until 2023 when they found themselves in an unexpected valley. Over the last year, they have been living a slowed-down version of van life in a small Colorado valley where God led them to fall in love with student ministry. Thanks so much for being with us today, Sarah.
Hey, yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you, I know I gave listeners a little bit about you, but why don't you just go ahead and tell them a little bit more about yourself and who you are?
Yeah, so I'm from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, born and raised there and lived there until 2021, which is when we hit the road in our van, which I'm in currently. And yeah, it's just been kind of a crazy, wild ride. I'm the second youngest of 5. And so, yeah, a very big blended family. My little sister is 12. Love her to death. She's the best. And yeah, we just have a really great community out here in Colorado, and it's been good for the last year.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and tell us kind of the story behind van life, or, just kind of some of your adventures on van life. I feel like that's a really big thing that a lot of people are doing these days. And I know a lot of people want to know how to get into it and just kind of like what life actually looks like living in a van.
It's definitely had its ups and downs. I mean, living in a van is amazing. It gives you so many blessings. You get to see so many beautiful places. And on top of that, it's allowed us to live up here in a very expensive town where the rent and housing market is very, very expensive, which is just really cool to see God work in that. However, there are like a lot of downsides to it. For example, like when you get sick, like all I want is a nice warm shower and don't really get that. You lose a lot of the inconveniences. But like I said, we started living in the van in 2021. Very funny story, but if anyone knows of the Great Freeze in Texas, that happened in February of 2021. At that point, Cody and I had been married for 6 months, and he was working full-time, 60-hour week as a woodworker in Texas, and I had just graduated college and was working a full-time job as well. And so we were just very overcommitted in a lot of different areas of our life. We were also really involved with our church back home in Texas. And so we decided when we were in our apartment in Texas during that great freeze, we had spent like a whole week together where, we just got to hang out. We were rested and we were playing board games. We had rolling blackouts where the lights would go off for like a couple hours, power all of it, and it would come on for like 45 minutes. It would be like, oh, one person go and cook and the other person download movies or whatever. And honestly, it was just like a really great time together, despite how crazy of a time it was, because like the grocery stores were like completely empty and it was a little bonkers to say the least. But yeah, during that time, I kind of looked at him and I was like, what if we just like lived in a van? We could just like drive away from all this craziness. And so a month later, we ended up finding our current van out at a dealership in Graham, Texas. And so we drove out there and we just said, hey, we have these like certain like things we need, like interest rate and things like that. And it fit every need we needed. So we purchased her all empty, blank slate. It was great. And that's how the story of us buying her was. So yeah, that was the beginning of it for sure.
Yeah. And how long did it take you guys to build it out?
So it took us a total of 6 months, but we were really only working on it for like 3 to 4. Living in an apartment can be really challenging to completely build out and build a self-converted camper van. Thankfully, since Cody was woodworking, he got to build all of the wood structure in the van, and it was really nice. I didn't have to learn that. However, I did learn how to do all of our electrical work all over YouTube. It was probably one of the biggest challenges of my life. It was way harder than college ever was, but it was honestly such like a cool experience when I just like wired things together and like got to turn on a light bulb. I genuinely just felt like kind of a scientist. I was like singing like Bill Nye in the background. Like that's how I felt.
That's hilarious.
It's just like so rewarding though, like to just be like, I did that. So
Yeah.
it definitely took like all of our money. We had saved, well, we had money in savings because I mean, we only took like a month till we bought it. So we had, thankfully, we had just gotten married. So we still had a honeymoon fund because we got married during COVID. We weren't able to go on a honeymoon. So we've kind of joked that we've been on like a 2-year honeymoon per se. In some sense, it's kind of true. So we got to use like that money, and then thankfully like stimulus checks, and then our tax return after just getting married, it like all lined up perfectly. God was so faithful in that, just like providing the finances to make it work. We didn't think it was gonna happen. Towards the end of our build, we had like no money left, so we were just really worried it wasn't gonna happen. Yeah, lots of blood, sweat, and tears into our beloved home.
Yeah. It sounds like it was quite the journey. And I always envy those people that have built out their vans. I'm like, I'd love to do that one day, and my husband would love to do it as well, but he would never actually live in one. So we would have to just do it and like use it as like a camper more than a, living situation. So give us the best and the worst part of living in a van.
Oh, I get this question a lot, and I seem to just never have an answer. Obviously, like you can see like the Instagram highlights if you ever follow like camper van people. It's just like the beautiful views that it takes you to. It truly does. It brings you to the best community. I've met the most diverse people, and they are just so awesome in every way. It's brought us to Utah and Oregon and here in Colorado where we've worked seasonally. And yeah, just the people and the beautiful places is amazing, truly great. However, there is definitely that bad side, which I think needs to be talked about a lot. It's not all of the highlight reel that people see. I, unfortunately, after I got COVID in 2020, and I feel like my immune system has just been like really bad after. It just really knocked me. So I've gotten sick quite a bit in the van, which has not been fun whatsoever. It's hard when you're like in such a confined space. In the summertime, it's nice because you can open up the doors and stuff and it's like fresh air right there. But, right now it's winter time here in Colorado, and I was actually just sick this last week, and just being confined in such a small space without the shower and like the cooking is a lot in here. It takes a lot of effort in such a small space to cook healthy and good meals, to make sure we get to like the grocery store and get fresh produce and it doesn't go bad and all the things. It can be challenging, as well as I would say like the lack of community that can happen with full-time travel. When we were hopping around working seasonally, that was the hardest aspect of what we were doing. We had each other, which we love each other, but the lack of friendship and community was very challenging. And knowing that when you get to a place, you're only going to be there for, 3 to 6 months, it's hard to like really dive deep, and you just have to be bold and confident and just dive deep into getting to know people. And that was really new to me. I wasn't used to that. Kind of a slow roll, trying to like get to know people. And, you really just have to dive deep and get to know people, or else it's really, really lonely space.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Me and my husband lived for 2 months at a time in 5 different places, and it was hard. It was really hard to want to invest the time and the energy into, getting to know people or being a part of a church or, whatever the case may be. And so I totally feel that. So obviously you guys do van life, and that is a whole event in and of itself. But what does outdoor recreation, living in the van, look like for you guys? What are you guys into?
For sure. I think you could totally live in a van and not be super into the outdoors. It's absolutely possible. There's a lot of city dwellers, and I think that there's a whole other aspect to that I might not understand. It's a little bit more chaotic. But yeah, for me, this has really allowed me to dive deep into the outdoors. I didn't grow up with that. I grew up in, the suburb in Texas. And thankfully, my dad blessed my brother and I with 10 acres. So we grew up on land, and that was his version of what he could bless us with in terms of outdoor recreation in order to fulfill his career. But it's just very different there than it is, here in Colorado. And so, now looking back on it, I was super grateful for that experience. And it really got me to appreciate all the little aspects of nature. But now we did grow up skiing, I will say that. So my dad's from Maine, and so it was a big part. We would come out to Colorado. We'd come out to Colorado a week out of the year, typically, sometimes 2 if we got lucky. And, when I was a kid and I got on skis, he put me on skis when I was 2 years old. And at that point, skiing was not nearly as expensive as it is today. And he goes, I did it because it was affordable. And it was something we would drive, the 14 hours overnight to come out here. And, the passes would be really, really inexpensive when I was a child. And so it was just something we got to do. So I did get that experience as a child. So now living in the mountains, it's really cool to have something as a hobby instead of it just being a vacation. And I got to reflect on that today. I was just out on the mountain and just out skiing, and just realized that it's such a blessing to have it more as a hobby than it is to spend thousands of dollars to get out here and go on a vacation. So feel very blessed in that. So definitely my winter sport would be skiing, and my summer activity per se would be definitely hiking, or nature walks as I like to call them.
Yeah. Nature walks. I like that. It's what exactly is hiking? Well, it's just an outdoor walk.
Yeah. And I just think it's so great, living in Colorado, you can drive 5 minutes and you could be out on a walk, or you could drive, a little bit extra out into, some backcountry area, and you might find yourself on a solid good hike. But for sure, just having that nature surrounding you is so good.
Yeah, definitely. Colorado is a beautiful place with so many good hikes and ski areas, and just kind of, nature's playground. I guess one of the things I kind of call Colorado is it's an adult playground, just like Utah.
For sure.
So being on this journey of van life, do you have a favorite place that you guys have been?
This is also a hard question. There's been really great places that we've visited, but in terms of living, obviously we've been here in Colorado for a little over a year now. I could say that I definitely love the mountains. The mountains are just my home. We lived in Oregon on the coast, where we worked literally on the beach. I was a bonfire attendant, so I built fires for the guests of the lodge. And although the beach was stunning, it got to the point of I don't know, I guess maybe it was the constant wave crashing and the sand getting everywhere. It just got to the point where I was this is no longer peaceful. This is a great vacation place, but it's not somewhere where I want to live. And so I would find myself in Oregon, driving away from the coast, trying to go inland where the mountains were to find a little alpine lake to enjoy peaceful scenery and find my peace in nature. So definitely the mountains.
Totally feel that. I am not a beach girl in the slightest. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. If I'm doing an activity, that's one thing, but just to like sit there and just like hang out on the beach, I'm like, nah, I need to be moving. I need to be doing something.
For sure.
So obviously this is a Christian podcast, so would love for you to talk about how the outdoors plays a role specifically in your relationship with Christ.
Oh, I mean, I kind of mentioned it, like when I go and find like myself in the mountains, like I just feel that peace. That peace is there. It allows me to kind of escape the chaos and just view his creation. I really find God most, he shows up most within like the sky for me in regards to like the stars and sunrises and sunsets, like showing like his mercies being new every morning, or even just like the sunshine being here in the wintertime where it's like pretty cold, just the little moments of sunshine, just like a big warm hug. Yeah, that just really bring me a lot of joy.
I love that. A big warm hug. I need to think about that when I go outside in the winter.
Yes.
I'm taking that one and putting it in my pocket.
It's needed. It really is.
Yeah, for sure. I've never thought of it that way. So do you have a specific story that you can share with us about a way in which God has revealed himself or maybe spoke to you through the outdoors?
Mine is just like, I know growing up, it was just really important for me, especially living in Texas where it was like super hot during the day, getting out in the morning. And I just remember certain mornings where the sunrise would just be phenomenal. We lived like kind of up on a hill, so we were very blessed with like amazing sunrises and sunsets. And high school was a really challenging time for me. Just emotionally, I had like a lot of anxiety. And so finding myself getting up in the morning and being able to like go step outside, having the sunrise and like the birds and just like that peace that you can find in the morning is just different than to me like sunset time. I just thoroughly enjoy sunrises. And I just remember there was this one specific time in high school that I just was not having it that day, but I was like, okay, I'll go outside and take care of the chickens. And so I went out to see the sunrise and just had this like moment of like, oh, thank you, God. Like, I'm so grateful to have you show up in this certain way to give me like, even if it's like a millisecond of peace, just to have that in the midst of anxiety was just so good. So golden.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's needed. Even like you said, even if it's that millisecond, just that tiny sliver of peace. And I love what you said about the sunrises, just because I think that watching the sunrise is more intentional than watching the sunset. And I also think it's a good way to start the day, because you're right, you do have that gratitude because the chaos of the day hasn't hit, and it is like a very special time because you can, actually sit there and be like, thank you, instead of like having the stressors and all of the things from the day and just kind of feeling more of like,
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that kind of answers the next question of like practical ways that people can connect to God through creation, even if they aren't in the mountains, because, you talked about the sky and just the birds and having those little moments. I think you said that was whenever you were in Texas, which I wouldn't say is like grand outdoor country. So
Yes.
that covers that one, I guess. All right. So switching gears a little bit into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory, would love for you to share a season of wilderness that you experienced and kind of what God taught you or prepared you for in that season.
Valleys are so hard to like really reflect back on because you can often like get back into that pain. And I feel like that's when like Satan loves to attack, is like when you try to reflect back on the past. And recently my church was sharing like a sermon about, and just kind of mentioned humility of when God like sings over you, you don't want to be in this one ditch where it's like, you're arrogant, like God's singing over me because I'm great. But you also don't want to be in this ditch of like, I've messed up or I've had like so much chaos happen in my life. Like I don't deserve this, but just like humbly knowing like your identity in Christ and knowing like he sings over you with love and kindness. And so when I was just reflecting over this past year, was just really fighting with like not falling back into, yeah, this mindset of grief. So this past year in 2023 was really challenging for myself. We've been in the van at that point for a year and a half, and we had been traveling seasonally to different jobs. We got up here into Colorado at the new year last year and was ski and snowboard instructing, which I love to do. And within like the first week of me being up here, I got flu B. And then 2 weeks later, I got flu A. 2 weeks later, I had gotten another virus. 2 weeks later, I got in like the stomach flu. And I was just like, what is happening? Like I said, being in the van, like it's hard. My husband was out, like he had to enjoy himself in order to like take care of me back at home. And so he was out snowboarding a bunch, which was great. But that's kind of where this valley really started, was just this season of like, oh my goodness, this is already chaotic. This is the beginning of the year. What's happening? This is supposed to be like another fun seasonal job. And unfortunately, at the end of our ski season in April, I got a message that I needed to fly home because my grandfather was really, really sick. And we were actually on our way to Loveland in another friend's van. And I just remember looking at my phone feeling so hopeless. Like, I need to book a flight. I want to be on the way to the airport at this current second, but I can't because I'm in another person's car going to a ski resort, which I should be super excited about. And yeah, just feeling very hopeless. And I had to spend the rest of the day, which I say I had to. It was such a blessing to be able to ski at another ski resort for free. But just having this like mind like boggling thing going like I need to get home to see my grandfather was very hopeless. So I sat there. I told my husband and my friend to go off without me, go have fun. I didn't feel like I could ski and not injure myself at that point because my mind wasn't in the right place. And it's an extreme sport to say the least, skiing is. And so if you're not in the right mindset, you can really get hurt. And so I spent a lot of the time up at the lodge just kind of reflecting, like staring at the mountains, being like, all right, God, like I feel so hopeless right now, but like, what do I do? And just cried a bunch. Spent a lot of time by myself. I think that time was needed, but again, just felt like a really hopeless spot in my life. And so I ended up getting to spend an entire week back in Texas with my grandfather, my family. Everybody flew into town while Cody stayed back to work because we weren't really at a financial space for us to be taking off that much work, considering it was the end of the season, which means there's a transition in between jobs. Being at seasonal work, you have to plan for that gap financially. It can be a little challenging if you're not used to it. And so anyways, we got very lucky. The ski resort had bereavement pay and everything. So I was able to spend an entire week down there in Texas. And that was just such a sweet time. It really was. As challenging as it was, I got to see, the more vulnerable sides of my family. And looking back on it now, I'm really grateful for that time. But after that week was up, I needed to fly back and finish out my last week of work. And then we were actually going to be going back to Texas for a couple of maybe like a month in between jobs before we were actually going to head back out to Oregon. And in that time frame, when I got back to Colorado to finish my last week of work, I got news that the job we had lined up fell through. And then I got a call the day before we were flying back to Texas that my grandfather had passed. And it just literally felt like the world was just crumbling. I was just at a loss. I felt really hopeless and confused. I had never, at this point in my life, I hadn't ever lost anyone that close to me. My grandfather and I were pretty close, which I was very grateful for. But nothing in the world can prepare you for grief, to say the least. I never would have expected that because obviously I hadn't experienced it before. But knowing that now, it's just it's a humbling time. It's a time where, you feel a little hopeless and you feel so much heartbreak. And the only thing you really can do at that point, at least for me, was to just turn to God. In that point in my life, it was, a valley I hadn't expected, to say the least.
Yeah. Sounds like it was just one thing after another, after another, after another. And, it's cliche, but, they say when it rains, it pours. And man, I feel like I've experienced that. And it sounds like you have too. And I think that what you're saying, like what you do with grief, there's really nothing in the world that can prepare you for it when you experience it. But I think that it really determines the outcome, kind of what you decide to do with it, or kind of where you turn when those things happen. And so would love for you to just share kind of how you, leaned into God, or kind of just what that season looked like for you realistically in your relationship with God.
Yeah. So after I got the news that my grandfather had passed, the next day I had hopped on a plane to go back to Texas. And that weekend I celebrated my sister-in-law's birthday, which was super sweet. And I was really happy to be home and be with family. Cody actually ended up taking the van and going to play a big disc golf tournament that he had planned for like months. And I was like, you can't miss out on this. If there's any disc golfers out there, it was GBO, the Glass Blown Open, and he ended up placing really well at it. So I was really proud of him. But that meant that I was at home for like a solid week and a half all by myself at his parents' house. And that was just such a challenging time to try and force myself to really turn towards God. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to stay in bed all day. I wanted to watch TV all day and just numb myself from the grief that I was feeling. I'm really thankful that I've had a lot of tools leading up to this point to get myself out of bed and really outside, to be frank. I think we have a dog, and she just really forced me to get out and go on walks and get outside. Thankfully, my in-laws also live near a lake, and so I would take her on walks down to the lake. And there was this one time where we went on this walk, and I was just grieving extra hard that morning. And we walked down to the dock, and my grandfather really loved sailboats. He was in the Coast Guard at one point, and his sailboats were just his happy place. And we go down to the dock, and there was some sailboats leaving the harbor, and I just sat there on the dock watching them, just really thankful to have this peaceful moment. It was really quiet out in the morning, and I just started praying, God, I know you're there. If you could just, maybe send him down for a few minutes to come sit with me on this dock right now. Just at this vulnerable stage of just I don't know how this works. I haven't looked into the theology of any of this, but if you could just send him down or come hang out with me. And I kid you not, Riley, my dog, sat right in my lap and just looked up at the sky for 5-10 minutes. And I just sat there crying because I just knew. I was like, God, thank you so much. Thank you for that moment of I couldn't explain it. She just was looking up at nothing. I was just you're literally looking at nothing in the sky right now. But I just felt that peace, and it was really, really sweet. So after that, Cody had gotten back home, and we were just I don't know what our next plan is. We didn't have a job. We didn't know what was up next. We were maybe we just need to get out of the van. Maybe we need to stay here in Texas to be with family. We were throwing out all the ideas in the world. And I was I just know one thing's for sure is I don't want to stay in Texas. I need to go where there's more outdoors for my mental health. I want to be able to drive 5 minutes and be on a really, really nice nature walk instead of the city. So I said, I don't know what else I want, but he told me, you know what? I want to go back to Colorado. We had a really great church community there. We don't have a job lined up, but I'm sure people will be able to help us. Let's just go drive out there and we'll figure it out. And so I was I just got to trust you. God's given me a life partner for a reason. In moments like these, I got to be able to trust him to lead me where we need to be. So we ended up packing up all of our stuff again and driving out back to our little valley here in Colorado without a job. No idea. We at least knew there was parking spots out there for us, so that was good. And we were like, we'll just see. There's a disc golf tournament on the way. We'll just go play that. And just having this faith I've never had before, knowing that like God was going to provide, because he had countless times before when we didn't have money. He has always provided for us. And knowing and being able to reflect on the past and knowing how faithful he is, I knew that he was going to provide again. And that was all I could rely on at that point, because everything else in my life didn't make sense. So we ended up back here in Colorado. And so we came to church that Sunday, that weekend, and someone was like, well, I'll hook you up with this interview and this job. And we'll, they had a million contacts for us. Small town is great when you need it. And so we started just like interviewing at random places. And that same day I was talking with our youth pastor at the church, and he just said, hey, by the way, we need a female leader for our student ministry. We're going to our youth camp in like a couple weeks in the beginning of June, and we really, really need a girl leader. We don't have, we have too many girls signed up and not enough leaders. And it was just like in that moment, God was like, this is why I brought you back. He clearly spoke to me and was just like, look, I've been calling you to ministry for years. I had the first call to ministry in high school, didn't listen to it for years because I was stuck in that cycle of sin for a very long time and rejection of God's will for me. And it was just one of those moments where it was just a clear, yes, you're going to go. I had no idea how. We had no money. It's like, I have to take another week off work. What are you talking about? Also, like, I don't know if I'm in the right space, like heart space for this. Like, are you sure? And, one thing after the other, he lined it all up. Cody ended up getting a job as a woodworker. And that month of June, the pay he started at was like going to give us the amount of money that we needed to cover all of our bills for the month without pulling out of any credit cards or anything like that. And I ended up getting a job secured before I left, and I was going to start right after I got back from the camp. And yeah, he was just so faithful and providing, and just one thing after the other. It was challenging going through the summer. I felt still very lost and confused, but I at least was happy to be, starting a new job and feeling that I had somewhat of a purpose. And that's when I kind of learned that like my pain is my purpose. I heard that in a sermon one time, and it really just came to life once I started attending our youth ministry weekly. We had some students who also struggled with loss and grief over the summer, and I got to love them through it. I got to relate to them on a level I've never been able to before, and be like, hey, I see you. It's going to be okay. And yeah, just to see that now and be able to look back on it is just so sweet.
Yeah. I love what you said there at the end about your pain is your purpose, because, that's really like the heart behind this podcast. And, sharing stories and things like this is there are so many people out there that are struggling with certain things. And I think if, your story can give someone just like a glimmer of hope, that there's even light at the end of the tunnel, then, that's all that we can really ask for. Because I think that so many times God blesses us with these stories, and in the midst of it, it doesn't seem like a blessing, but, he wants to use it in some way. And it's just whether or not we're going to allow him to.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys ended up in Colorado. Cody's still doing woodworking. Is that right?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
And then are you still involved with the women's ministry thing that you were doing?
Yeah. So we've been involved with our student ministry since the end of May, beginning of June, and have been ever since then. So that's been really cool. And then for work, I'm a manager of one of the coffee shops out here. And we actually have a lot of our workers are high schoolers as well. So it feels kind of like a branch of ministry out here. It's kind
Right.
of neat.
Right. That's so cool. I feel like God was just like paving the way for you to end up there, and to nudge you in different directions. Like if you guys would have went to Oregon, or just there's just so many things where it's like you kind of can't make some of this stuff up. You hear stories where it's like if these 5 events wouldn't have aligned in the way in which they did, like this would not be my story. And so not to take light of any of those, but they all did add up to what and where you are now, which is just I'm sure there's still grief in that season looking back, but I'm sure there's also a level of joy and purpose because you feel more aligned in your purpose and what you're doing now than you did before. And you were going more on like your own journey, maybe than like the journey that God had wanted you on. And so I just thank you so much for sharing that. And I know it was a hard season. There seems to be a lot packed into there. And, like you said, grief is one of those things that there's nothing that can prepare you for it. And everybody, I think, handles grief differently, and it looks differently for everyone. And, it's not something I'm going to probably ask your advice on, like what advice you would give to someone going through that, because I think that it's, just different for everyone. But what words of encouragement or hope would you offer to those currently in a similar situation?
I'm going to start with this verse in Hebrews. It's Hebrews 11:1. It says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And I've kind of just been convicted on my lack of faith, per se, over this past season. And so I've been kind of diving deeper into the women of the Bible and just kind of studying them and just noticing across the board the lack of, or also just the immense faith that they had and they had to have. For example, Sarah, she was barren for most of her life and she wanted to give Abraham a child, an heir, and she was asking God for it, and God's like, not yet, not yet. And so she tried to take matters into her own hands and eventually had to learn like to have that faith so God could provide. And I think that's what I really learned in this season is just the faith that I really had to have. So if I could really give any encouragement to anyone who is grieving, is just to have faith. It could be as small as a mustard seed, but God's going to use it. And like that you're not alone either. If you are grieving the loss of someone really close to you, or if you know anybody who is that you're not alone, and to make sure that that people know that they're loved around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I try to pray or to think about whenever I am in those seasons where I don't feel the faith, it's like there's a song and I'm going to forget what it is, but one of the lyrics is like, I believe, but help my unbelief, and it's like, even though we have faith, there could still be a part of us that doesn't believe. And so I think that it's like, help me with whatever that is, wherever I'm struggling with that, because that's okay. Like, as long as we bring it to God.
I mean, I even think like our doubt like strengthens our faith too. Like it's okay to doubt. It's okay to be that way. Like you're saying, like bring it to God. Like he's going to strengthen you with that.
Yeah. I think so many times Christians are scared, maybe not scared, but feel shame in like asking questions or having doubts about the Bible. And it's like, no, that's normal. Like if anyone tells you they don't have any, they're lying to you. And so, as long as you look at them with, well, one, does it change the main thing? Like, does it change your main belief? Okay. If it doesn't, then that's okay. Let's try to, help you through that. But it's okay to ask questions, and it's good to ask questions because there's so much of the Bible that is so complex, and I know I don't understand it all. And if I don't ask questions, I'm not going to learn anymore.
So true.
So I think it works the same way with our faith. Like if you have questions, just bring them to God, ask him to show you, ask him to reveal them to you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for that piece of encouragement, Sarah. I truly appreciate you sharing your story and for you being on this podcast, and would love for you to share with the listeners if they want to keep up with your journey on you and Cody's van life. Where can they find you and keep up with your journeys?
So we do have a little Instagram. I don't keep up with a whole lot anymore since we haven't been doing as much full-time travel, but it's still just such a fun way to connect with other people. We have actually some other van lifers coming out to the area to ski with us that we met on Instagram, a couple years ago. So it's cool. So if you want to connect, we're on Instagram. It's Sanford, the letter N, and then Sun. Hence our last name plus our van Sunny, Sanford and Son. So you can find us there. Would love to connect. And yeah, if you need a piece of encouragement or just want to go on a hike if you're in Colorado, let me know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Sarah. And again, thank you so much for just sharing your story. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.